In October 2014, 3 young hikers vanished without a trace on a trail considered safe in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. For 6 years, they were presumed dead, victims of a sudden accident or a predator. But in September 2020, one of them walked out from the edge of the forest and appeared at a local ranger station, alive but unrecognizable. What he told the police when he was finally able to speak horrified even the most experienced investigators. Where had he been for those 6 years, and what really happened to them? You'll find out in this video. Enjoy watching. Some names and details in this story have been changed to ensure anonymity and privacy. Not all images are from the actual scene. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On the morning of October 3, 2014, early sunlight fell across the dense pine-covered slopes of the Great Smoky Mountains, creating faint beams of light piercing through the thick fog that perpetually hangs over the high forest areas. This region, particularly the Forney Ridge, Clingman's Dome, and Deep Creek trails, has long been known for being both majestic and unforgiving. Where steep terrain, narrow trails, and high humidity can quickly turn an ordinary hike into a real challenge, even for experienced trekkers. At the parking lot near the Sugarlands Visitor Center, 3 young people arrived at 7:40 a.m. carrying large backpacks, water, packaged food, and basic gear for a 3-day journey. Ethan Ward, 25, a software engineer from Nashville, was described in reports as cautious, with a habit of planning thoroughly and regularly reviewing topographic maps before every trip. Accompanying him was Mason Doyle, 27, a discharged veteran now working in Knoxville. His military experience helped him adapt well to natural terrain and handle outdoor situations. The third was Chloe Ramirez, 24, a freelance photographer living in Asheville who often documented trekking routes through her lens and was known for her keen observational eye, liking to explore less traveled viewpoints. In the registry log that day at the visitor center, the group clearly noted their plan, starting from Clingman's Dome, following the Forney Ridge Trail, continuing down to Deep Creek over the first 2 days, then returning to the Forney Creek trailhead by the end of the 3rd day to pick up their vehicle and leave the park. The morning weather was dry, temperatures stable, visibility good. Conditions that rarely last into the afternoon. In this area famous for sudden fog banks descending on the slopes. After leaving the parking lot and heading onto the trail, the group was captured on camera in a calm state, with full gear and no signs of anything unusual. At 11:42 a.m., a group of hikers, coming the opposite way on Forney Ridge, confirmed encountering the 3, describing them as moving steadily, not hurried, not tired, and clearly oriented. Chloe sent a photo via phone from near the Clingman's Dome area at 4:10 p.m., considered the last digital trace of the group that day. After that point, no further location data, calls or messages were recorded from any of their devices. That afternoon, thick fog began appearing on the steep trails around Deep Creek, rapidly reducing visibility. However, no dangerous weather alerts were issued. By evening, families still believed the group might be in an area without signal, but as the 2nd day passed and into the end of the 3rd day, the prolonged silence became abnormal. Ethan regularly updated relatives on previous trips, Mason always proactively reported his position, and Chloe rarely turned off her phone due to her photography work. When all 3 failed to respond to any calls or messages for nearly 48 hours, their families collectively contacted the Great Smoky Mountains Ranger Center to report the loss of contact. Immediately after receiving the loss of contact reports from the families on the evening of October 5, 2014, the on-duty ranger team at Great Smoky Mountains initiated the emergency response protocol, cross-referencing information with the trail registration data for the 3 hikers at the Sugarlands Visitor Center. Based on the last recorded timestamp from camera footage and the testimony of the hikers who encountered them at 11:42 a.m. on Forney Ridge, rangers determined the initial last known point to be the trail section near the junction of Forney Ridge Trail and the route descending to Deep Creek. This was the last location with confirmed witness verification, consistent with the group's registered direction of travel. That same night, a small patrol team was dispatched for a quick check of the area around the LKP to determine if there were signs of turning back, emergency camping, or any obvious accident, but no lights, campfires, or items outside the natural trail environment were found. The next morning, SAR Phase 1 was officially launched. The team consisted of 18 NPS personnel, plus 2 K9 units, trained to detect human scent in humid mountain forest environments. Basic equipment included detailed topographic maps, communication devices, handheld GPS units, and trail marking tools to avoid overlap during search sweeps. Rangers set up a temporary control area at Forney Creek Trailhead, where the hikers' vehicle remained parked untouched, serving as the central point for SAR teams to fan out in a search radius. Per standard protocol, the initial priority radius was set at 3 miles around the LKP, based on the group's average travel capability from the 11:42 a.m. timestamp until families reported loss of contact. SAR teams were divided into smaller groups by direction, one following the planned Deep Creek route, one sweeping back up Forney Ridge to check for turnaround or deviation, and another skirting the slopes down to lower forest areas. Weather conditions that morning were favorable, good visibility, most of the previous afternoon's fog had lifted, making trace observation more feasible. However, the area around the LKP showed no clear signs of accident. No deep skid marks in the soil, no fresh rock falls, no hastily discarded items like jackets or water bottles. Teams searching the dense forest on both sides of the trail also found no unusual branch breaks or long roll marks indicating a fall. K9 units deployed along the main route picked up scent that cut off near the same point without establishing a clear tracking direction, common in high humidity conditions with constantly shifting mountain winds. Cross-referencing the group's planned route, rangers assessed that, given the weather that day and the three's trekking experience, the likelihood of them deliberately veering onto unmarked side trails was low. The absence of any clear off-trail signs made the situation harder to evaluate. After nearly 6 hours of continuous searching, the entire 3-mile area around the LKP was thoroughly covered, but yielded no new clues. SAR teams noted initial conclusions. The area provided insufficient data to pinpoint an incident location, and the group's lack of any traces within the standard access radius suggested they may have moved deeper into backcountry before disappearing. Conclusion of the first day's search activity: expand the investigation beyond the 3-mile area and establish a second broader search phase to determine the group's actual movement direction before loss of contact. On the morning of October 7, 2014, after searches within the 3-mile radius around the last known point yielded no viable clues, the incident command post at Forney Creek Trailhead decided to escalate SAR operations to a larger scale, covering approximately 40 miles of surrounding forest. Forces were reinforced with an additional 32 NPS personnel from other park ranger stations, plus 3 volunteer SAR teams from Tennessee and North Carolina. A helicopter equipped with FLIR was deployed to scan valleys and large cliffs, while 2 high-resolution optical camera drones were used to record ground anomalies, especially in dense tree areas inaccessible to the helicopter. From the temporary command post, map specialists and coordinators used detailed Smoky's topographic maps to divide the 40-mile area into search grids corresponding to SAR teams, prioritizing deep valleys, abrupt trail-to-slope transitions, and poorly marked side routes. On the first day of the expanded phase, a tracking team in the area between Forney Ridge and Deep Creek reported finding a lightly disturbed patch of ground, surface leaf litter pushed aside, exposing soft, moist soil beneath. However, there were no clear boot prints, insufficient pattern to determine movement direction, and it could not be concluded as human-caused versus natural. A drone flying nearby also captured a few small ground depressions, but shapes were not clear enough to identify origin. As ground forces continued expanding the search, Rangers interviewed all hikers present on adjacent trails in the 2 days before and after the disappearance. Over 40 individuals who passed through the area during that time frame were verified. Most reported no unusual signs, except for a group of 4 who said they heard a very brief growl mixed with a shout in the afternoon of October 3rd. In an area about 1.5 miles from Klingman's Dome, witnesses described the sound as unlike familiar wildlife and not lasting long enough to pinpoint location. Though non-specific, rangers added the described area to the next search grid list. Meanwhile, FLIR scans over multiple valleys detected no heat sources consistent with humans in the 40-mile swept area. Afternoon weather brought thick fog again, forcing drones to lower altitude and limiting observation range. After 2 days of expanded searching, results remained very limited. No clothing traces, no personal gear, no temporary camping signs, no movement pattern consistent with a 3-person group, and no emergency signals from electronic devices. Given the trekking experience of all 3, rangers assessed that the likelihood of getting lost had significantly decreased. Ethan habitually monitored maps continuously, Mason had military experience enduring terrain stress, and Chloe rarely left main trails while photographing. In that morning's weather conditions, the 3 were fully capable of self-orienting back to the trail, if only a few hundred meters off course. The complete disappearance of all 3 without any clear signs made the lost hypothesis increasingly inconsistent with available facts. Over the next 2 days of the expanded search operation, as SAR forces continued sweeping each terrain grid within the 40-mile forest area, the tracking team on the western slope of Forney Ridge began discovering the first physical evidence potentially directly related to the hiker's journey, opening an entirely new evaluation direction for the entire case. The first item found was a black plastic lens cap lying right next to the base of a low bush, about 70 meters off the main trail. When cross-referenced with visitor center declarations, rangers confirmed Chloe Ramirez carried a mirrorless camera matching this exact lens cap model. The cap's surface had several horizontal scratches, not deep but distributed toward one side, suggesting it fell during impact or was forcefully yanked from the camera body. No clear boot prints around it, but the leaf litter was slightly depressed in a gentle curve, leading specialists to conclude the spot may have been traversed by a person or object not long before fresh leaf fall covered it again. While expanding the search around this area, one SAR team discovered the second item, an approximately 18 centimeters torn backpack strap segment, made from thick nylon commonly used for trekking packs. The nylon edges were not naturally frayed, but showed abrupt tearing, as if pulled hard enough to split fibers, completely different from random snags on branches. One side still had faint traces of thin rubber coating, matching the backpack design. Mason was recorded as carrying. Rangers photographed, documented the fiber twist angle, pull direction, and deformation level, preliminarily assessing that the force was not from backpack weight during normal obstruction. Instead, it appeared as a direct, intentional yank creating instant tearing. The third item was discovered late that afternoon in the same general area, but farther toward the descent to Deep Creek. A trekking pole broken in 2, aluminum alloy shaft, snapped at about 1/3 length from the grip. The break was not gradual bending or pressure crushing, but a sudden lateral force fracture, crumpling the tube edge at the break point. On-site quick analysis showed the force direction was left to right, or right to left, depending on grip orientation at the time, but definitely not from a user falling and planting the pole into the ground. In many typical accident disappearances, poles are bent, distorted, or scratched along the length, but here the sharp break and horizontal force impact stood out clearly. When examining these items in the context of the discovery terrain, the tracking team also found a faint drag mark, over 2 meters long, on a gentle slope covered in leaf litter. The mark was not deep enough to indicate a heavy object but showed surface leaves pushed aside in a consistent linear band, indicating an object dragged through in a controlled straight path, not wildlife. As there were no accompanying paw prints or random side disturbances, mark depth and soil compression did not allow weight estimation, but the disturbance pattern suggested controlled pulling force rather than an individual falling and rolling. All discovered evidence, the lens cap, torn strap, broken trekking pole, and drag mark, did not individually provide clear conclusions, but together they formed a sequence inconsistent with standard trekking accident patterns. A dropped lens cap could be random. A torn strap could snag on obstacles, a trekking pole could break in a slip fall, and a drag mark could be animal scratching. However, the probability of 4 such signs appearing in a narrow area, same time frame, and along the predicted group movement direction without relation to each other was extremely low. Especially, initial mechanical analysis of the trekking pole and strap showed force patterns more consistent with unusual yanking than natural accidents. In the internal report at day's end, the SR team leader noted that the evidence abnormality level was sufficient to elevate the case to possible external intervention category. This assessment, combined with failure to find further group movement traces in both the 3-mile and 40-mile swept areas, triggered federal-level involvement per protocol. All evidence was sealed, coded, transferred to the ICP, and filed for federal agency handover for deeper evaluation, officially opening the next phase of the case, where investigation no longer relied on the lost hypothesis, but seriously considered the possibility of human factors influencing the 3Hikers' disappearance. After the first physical evidence items were documented in the western Forney Ridge area, the Incident Command Center shifted its focus to analyzing all electronic data related to the 3Hikers in order to precisely determine the moment their devices ceased operation and cross-reference it with the timelines collected by the SR team at the scene. Based on an emergency request sent to the cellular provider, the Rangers received the signal logs for all 3 phones. The results showed that all 3 devices lost network connection and stopped emitting location signals at the exact same moment, 4:17 p.m. on October 3, 2014. Prior to that time, the devices had recorded sparse but steady pings from multiple cell towers on the Tennessee side, consistent with the route the group had planned to follow. The fact that all 3 phones stopped functioning in a single instant is a rare coincidence in typical lost hiker cases, where devices usually drain battery gradually or lose signal at different points due to varying terrain. Using the GPS logs recovered from the carrier's automatically backed up cache, the Rangers determined that the group's final movement path still adhered to the main trail from Klingman's Dome toward Forney Ridge, with no indication of deviating from the trail or turning onto side branches. The final GPS signals from all 3 devices were within a radius of no more than 200 meters around a steep section of trail, coinciding with the area where SAR later found the lens cap and the torn backpack strap, creating positional alignment between the electronic data and the physical evidence at the scene. In addition to the phones, the Rangers also collected data from the GoPro that Chloe was reported to have carried. The memory card from the GoPro was found in her personal belongings at home and was not among the items taken into the forest, but the GoPro device has a feature that automatically records temporary files and uploads backups to the cloud if a Wi-Fi connection becomes available. In this case, no complete video file was created on the day of the disappearance, but an 11-second corrupted temporary file was recorded by the cloud system before being interrupted. When extracting the corrupted file, the audio analysis team discovered that the video portion was unusable, but the audio remained intact. The recorded audio included mountain ridge wind sounds, light footsteps, followed by a short, sharp metallic ringing sound similar to a hard metal object striking an iron or steel surface. About 1 second later, there was a low and brief thud, not clear enough to determine whether it was a human sound or an object falling. The file ended abruptly, aligning almost exactly with the moment the 3 phones ceased operation. The Rangers incorporated this audio data into the overall timeline, marking it as the final event recorded from any of the group's devices before the disappearance. When cross-referencing all data sources, several anomalies became clearer. In lost hiker cases, Phone signals typically fade gradually as batteries weaken or terrain blocks reception, but here, all three devices stopped at a fixed instant. Additionally, the GPS track showed no deviation from the planned trekking route. The group exhibited no signs of unusual movement, sudden direction changes, or attempts to turn back due to issues like slipping or changing weather conditions. Another strange factor was the presence of the metallic sound in the GoPro file, a type of sound that, according to technical evaluation, does not match the natural conditions around Forney Ridge, where the rock is primarily shale and soft sedimentary, with few artificial metal structures. When comparing this electronic data with the evidence found in the nearby forest section, the rangers noted alignment in location, timing, and the anomalous nature of the signs, particularly the simultaneous device shutdowns, the drag mark, and the trekking pole broken by lateral force. These analyses significantly increased suspicions of human involvement. The technical report was completed by the end of the day and attached all electronic data, along with the conclusion that the pattern of device shutdowns did not match any recorded trekking accident model in the Smokies area. After the technical report on the electronic data was completed and forwarded to command, the NPS reassessed the case severity under federal criteria, which clearly define the conditions for FBI involvement in a backcountry disappearance. These criteria include the presence of signs of violence or unusual evidence inconsistent with natural accident patterns, multiple individuals disappearing simultaneously in a high search density area with no results, simultaneous interruption of personal electronic devices at the same moment, and, finally, a high likelihood of human intervention evidenced by physical items or technical data. For the 3Hikers, all four criteria were met. The broken, torn, and drag mark evidence indicated abnormal mechanical impact. The three electronic devices stopped simultaneously. There were no signs of going off trail or accident, and these factors occurred in a thoroughly searched area with no signs of survival. The lead ranger immediately submitted the full summary file to the FBI Knoxville office, the unit with federal investigative authority over disappearances on National Park Service land. Within hours of reviewing the facts, the FBI concluded that the case fully met the conditions to be classified as a potential foul play disappearance and officially activated the criminal case protocol. The case was codenamed Smoky's 3 case, based on the number of victims and the location of the disappearance. The initial file included all SAR scene photographs, search area maps, written analysis of GPS data and carrier signal logs, audio data extracted from the GoPro file, mechanical descriptions of the evidence items, and a detailed timeline from 7:40 a.m. to 4:17 p.m., when the final signal was recorded. In the very first step, the FBI cross-referenced the group's disappearance method and circumstances with the database of unsolved disappearances in the Great Smoky Mountains over the past 25 years. The results identified 23 cases with similar characteristics occurring near low-traffic trails, no signs of going off-trail before vanishing, personal devices losing signal abruptly or not being found, and no bodies or clear belongings at the scene. 14 of the 23 cases occurred within a 12-mile radius around the area between Forney Ridge and Hazel Creek, a complex terrain with deep valleys, steep slopes, and unmarked side paths, but notably, 9 of them were less than 3 miles from the trail the 3Hikers had taken. Deeper analysis revealed several unusually recurring common points. 1. Most victims disappeared in non-severe weather, ruling out sudden storms. 2. Many groups vanished in sections with limited visibility due to thick fog or dense forest blocking light. 3. None left clear drag marks, but some older reports described inexplicable ground disturbance, and 4. In 7 cases, witnesses reported hearing strange noises before the disappearance time. Based on this compilation, the FBI concluded that the Smokies may not only have natural lost hiker patterns, but could feature a form of human intervention behavior pattern, though evidence was insufficient to describe it specifically. Given that the disappearance of Ethan, Mason, and Chloe fully matched the characteristics of the chain of 23 unsolved cases, particularly in location alignment, weather conditions, sudden nature, and mechanical disturbance signs, the FBI assessed a very high risk of serious criminal involvement. An internal review was launched to determine the necessity of escalating the case. The analyses indicated that 3 smartphones losing signal in such a narrow moment was more consistent with forced shutdown or destruction than with natural power off due to battery or signal loss. The scene evidence showed strong lateral force impact, inconsistent with natural accidents. The drag mark had a consistent direction with no large animal tracks, reducing the likelihood of wildlife dragging victims or objects. And most importantly, there was no trace suggesting the group voluntarily left the trail. All these factors nearly eliminated the initial assessment of simple disorientation. By the end of the day, the FBI officially upgraded the 3Hikers' disappearance to suspected abduction or unlawful interference, changing the classification code from SAR to CID. This marked a complete shift in the case nature from a standard trekking disappearance to a full federal criminal investigation, where evidence, electronic data, and all scene signs were examined under standards for cases potentially involving intentional criminal acts. In the 5 years following the FBI's takeover of the Smoky's 3-case search and investigation efforts were conducted in multiple phases with increasingly broad scope and methods, but no new discoveries of sufficient value were made to alter the case's nature. In the first year, operations focused on sweeping the entire area between Forney Ridge, Clingman's Dome, and Hazel Creek, using specialized K-9 units, FLIR helicopters, high-resolution drones, and experienced backcountry tracking teams. Several large-scale search campaigns were conducted in dry seasons when under-canopy visibility was better and flash flood risk was lower. The search radius expanded to over 120 square miles, including deep valleys, steep slopes, and poorly marked side trails, but only natural traces or unrelated objects were recovered. In the second and third years, the FBI coordinated with NPS to deploy teams specialized in locating buried remains, using ground-penetrating radar and stratigraphic analysis at sites with ground disturbance similar to the initial scene signs. However, the Smoky's high humidity, thick 20–40 centimeters, leaf litter layer depending on the area, and rapid soil decomposition made identifying old disturbances inaccurate. Many suspect sites were ruled out after examination revealed natural landslides or large animal activity. In the fourth year, the FBI expanded search methods to analyze rainwater flow patterns and the possibility that remains could have been carried into deep creeks or narrow rock crevices. Specialized canyoning and rope rescue teams were deployed, but no clothing, equipment, bones, or human organic traces were found. Divers were mobilized to check natural pools and basins at Deep Creek and Noland Creek, but results were completely negative. The primary reason for this prolonged impasse lies in the geographic characteristics of the Great Smoky Mountains: a wet ecosystem, rapid decay rate, seasonal thick leaf fall, continuously varying slopes, and hundreds of natural side paths that cause any traces to vanish within weeks or months. Any small item swept by water or buried in organic mulch becomes nearly undetectable after extended time. Additionally, large animals such as black bears, coyotes, and feral hogs can disturb or drag objects, further complicating trace interpretation. Throughout the entire 5-year period, collected evidence remained limited to the 4 initial items: the lens cap, torn backpack strap, broken trekking pole, and drag mark. No additional discoveries such as clothing, shoes, watches, electronic devices, or human bones, factors that typically help narrow investigations in prolonged disappearances, were made. All evidence was stored under forensic protocol at the FBI Knoxville warehouse, with independent experts re-evaluating it every 6 months to cross-reference any new data from other regional cases. The case file was also annually reviewed, especially in dry weather seasons when reopening search areas became feasible. However, no additional evidence strong enough to confirm the group's movement after the phone signal loss or to determine whether the initial mechanical traces resulted from a rare accident or human intervention, emerged. By the end of the 5th year, the FBI placed the case in active cold case status, meaning the file remains open and information is monitored, but no further large-scale searches are conducted due to lack of new leads. Nevertheless, the case was never fully closed, and all related documents were preserved for immediate reactivation upon any new information. 1 year after the disappearance case was classified as an active cold case, on the morning of September 14, 2020, a trail maintenance worker in Great Smoky Mountains reported to ICP that he had seen a man in an exhausted state sitting near the entrance to Big Creek Campground, more than 18 miles of wilderness trail from the Forney Ridge area. When rangers approached, they discovered the man was severely emaciated, with tattered clothing, barefoot, skin showing patchy sunburn, but also pale areas, as if deprived of sunlight for prolonged periods. The individual carried no equipment or belongings whatsoever, no backpack, no ID, no shoes, and responded slowly to speech. When asked his name, he repeated the phrase, Ethan Ward, prompting the rangers to immediately report to ICP, as this was the name of one of the 3 hikers missing 6 years earlier. The man was taken directly to the nearest medical facility, where doctors noted a series of signs of extreme depletion, significant weight loss compared to his 2014 records, muscle atrophy, numerous small scars on the wrists and ankles, along with severe dehydration and micronutrient deficiencies. Low blood pressure, weak pulse, slowed reflexes, and panic reactions to bright light suggested he may have been in conditions of restricted light exposure for an extended time. Because his appearance had changed so drastically from the photos in the file, identity verification had to follow a 3-step forensic protocol. First, fingerprints were scanned and compared against federal databases. The results showed 10 points of match with Ethan Ward's pre-2014 civilian records. Next, a DNA sample was taken from oral mucosa and sent to the FBI Knoxville lab, yielding a complete match with the DNA sample collected from a toothbrush submitted by the family 6 years earlier. Dental examination was the final step, comparing current dental X-rays with Ethan's records from a Nashville clinic. Features such as an amalgam filling on tooth hash 14 and slight misalignment of the left canine matched perfectly. With all 3 independent verification methods yielding the same result, the FBI declared the man's identity to be Ethan Ward, one of the 3 victims in the Smoky's 3 case. Immediately after Ethan's identity was confirmed, a team of FBI and NPS medical experts began conducting a comprehensive series of evaluations to assess the cumulative damage over the 6 years of disappearance, with the goal of determining whether the physical manifestations were consistent with wilderness survival or prolonged confinement under restricted conditions. Initial blood tests revealed Ethan's vitamin D levels were critically low, approaching the minimum threshold needed to sustain normal physiological function, a medical indicator that he had almost no exposure to sunlight for an extended period. Such severe vitamin D deficiency could not occur in a natural forest environment where even the dense canopy of the Smokies allows enough light penetration to maintain stable blood levels. This suggested he had been in an enclosed space or received only very limited light for most of the missing time. Additionally, parathyroid hormone tests showed overactivity to compensate for the vitamin D deficiency, a sign that the lack of light had persisted for years, not just weeks or months. Muscle atrophy analysis was performed using limb circumference measurements, MRI imaging, and muscle tone assessment. Ethan had lost more than 40% of his muscle mass compared to the average for a man of his age and build recorded in 2014. Major muscle groups in the legs, thighs, arms, and shoulders were markedly atrophied, accompanied by low elasticity and sharply reduced subcutaneous fat. This degree of atrophy was consistent with prolonged restricted movement, completely opposite to wilderness survival patterns, where lost hikers typically experience muscle weakening from malnutrition, but retain relatively balanced muscle mass due to constant movement in search of food, water, and shelter. Ethan also displayed poor motor coordination, slow walking reflexes, and unstable gait, consistent with someone accustomed to confined spaces, rarely standing upright or moving long distances. When examining the musculoskeletal system, doctors found multiple call-used areas around the wrists and ankles, corresponding to locations where restraints typically exert pressure. Notably, the skin in these areas showed repeated scarring, indicating wounds that had formed, healed, and reopened multiple times over the years. Under magnification, different healing cycles were visible, with some scars old and pale, others newer and darker, evidencing repeated mechanical trauma over many years. Skin biopsies from these sites also revealed fibrosis from prolonged friction, commonly seen in cases of movement restriction by ropes, cuffs, or fixed restraints. Additionally, numerous small scars were found on the back and calves, shaped consistently with blunt, rounded, or edged objects. Unlike scratches from thorns, rocks, or branches in a natural forest environment, the scar texture indicated closed-wound healing rather than open tears from terrain. Full-body X-rays revealed several old healed bone injuries with malalignment, a fracture of right rib hash 8-2, old fractures in left metacarpal bones, and minor damage to the right ankle bone. These injuries had healed, but with misalignment, indicating they were not properly immobilized and healed spontaneously without medical care. The most severe misalignment in the hand bones suggested impact from blunt force or defensive blocking rather than a simple fall. Bone density analysis via DEXA scan recorded osteoporosis far exceeding normal levels for his age, comparable to elderly individuals or those immobilized for years. This again reinforced the hypothesis that Ethan had been in an enclosed space with near-zero sunlight exposure and extremely limited physical activity. When evaluating soft tissue and skin, many areas of Ethan's skin were abnormally pale, while others were darker, creating an uneven pigmentation pattern, a phenomenon that occurs only when the body is regularly exposed to weak artificial light from a single direction rather than natural omnidirectional sunlight. Furthermore, callus formation on the soles of his feet was virtually non-existent, completely opposite to someone who had traveled long distances or survived in the wilderness, where soles typically thicken rapidly. This indicated Ethan had done very little walking during the 6 missing years, reinforcing prior conclusions about movement restriction. In the overall assessment, the FBI medical team emphasized that Ethan's chain of physiological signs did not match any pattern associated with long-term wilderness stranding. There were no signs of extensive self-movement, no mechanical adaptations of a survivor, no scarring consistent with natural environmental injuries, and no skin erosion patterns from continuous sun or temperature variation. Conversely, the entire test results, including severe vitamin D deficiency, profound muscle atrophy, cyclical repeated scarring, osteoporosis, abnormal soft tissue pigmentation distribution, and malaligned bone healing, all pointed to a single conclusion: Ethan had been confined in a light-restricted, movement-restricted environment without medical care for many years. These accumulated biological markers could not be faked, could not form in a natural setting, and could only appear when a person is imprisoned or deprived of freedom under prolonged conditions. This was the first medical conclusion confirming that Ethan's 6 missing years were not a wilderness survival experience, but a prolonged confinement in the full medico-legal sense. After the medical evaluation team completed their report, concluding that Ethan had been subjected to long-term confinement in a restricted environment, the FBI began implementing the information-gathering interview process using the cognitive interview technique, a specialized method designed to recover fragmented memories in victims who have experienced prolonged trauma or lived under controlled conditions. Because Ethan showed numerous signs of psychological instability and possible post-confinement stress effects, the interview team included a forensic psychologist, a lead investigator, and a physician monitoring physiological responses throughout the sessions. The process began by having Ethan describe the most general sensations related to the missing period, without requiring details or linear narration to avoid pressuring his scattered memory. Ethan spoke haltingly, in fragments, but certain memory pieces recurred with the same themes: echoing metallic sounds, the smell of damp earth, the steady sound of dripping water, and the feeling of tight surrounding space. In the second step of the protocol, the investigator asked Ethan to focus on each sense separately. When focusing on hearing, Ethan described metallic sounds as light impacts followed by vibration, not like handheld tools, but like a metal object being opened or closed, with short resonance echoing in multiple beats. He could not pinpoint the source, but said it occurred frequently, sometimes stronger, as if additional force was applied. When focusing on smell, Ethan recalled a heavy and cold earth odor mixed with rusty metal and damp wood. This was not the typical forest smell of the Smokies, but rather enclosed, stagnant, and poorly ventilated. Regarding touch, Ethan said his skin was constantly cold, especially his feet, indicating contact with uninsulated ground or surface. When describing vision, he said the light was mostly dim, pale yellow, not natural, and insufficient to illuminate the entire space. He did not clearly remember the light source, but described it as overhead, weak, and slightly flickering, like from an oil lamp or low-wattage bulb. In the next phase of the cognitive interview, the team asked Ethan to intuitively recreate the space. He described walls as rough, cold, and damp, with a texture like stone or raw concrete, not wood. He also said that when sitting, his back sometimes touched a hard and uneven surface. This differed markedly from confinement patterns in tents, shacks, or wooden cabins seen in many survival cases. Ethan's description aligned more with a bunker-like or underground structure. When asked about background sounds, Ethan repeatedly mentioned steady water dripping like a regular rhythm that lasted all day. The FBI's audio forensics team noted that continuous dripping is common in underground spaces with condensation, seepage, or groundwater contacting stone surfaces. Another element in Ethan's memory was a slight vibration of unclear origin, sometimes cyclical. This memory could relate to the opening-closing of a heavy metal door, impact against a fixed frame, or vibration transmitted through hard flooring. Ethan could not specify frequency, but mentioned it multiple times in the same session. This led the team to flag it as a high-stability memory fragment. When further probing the structure, Ethan described the space as wider than a car, but not tall enough to stand upright for long. He remembered having to stoop slightly when moving, and sometimes bumping his head on the ceiling, indicating limited ceiling height. Investigators noted this detail as consistent with a low corridor or narrow underground chamber. Another detail Ethan mentioned was the sensation of going down with many small steps, prompting the team to consider the possible existence of stairs or a slope to access the confinement space. Although he could not confirm the number of steps or length, the memory of stepping down and slight slipping on a damp surface was valuable information. Regarding objects, Ethan described something like a long cold bar attached to the wall, but could not recall its function. The team speculated it might be a fixing point for restraints or a structural support bar, but made no definitive conclusion. When investigators attempted to have Ethan describe sounds related to other people, he became fearful but still mentioned someone nearby somewhere, not in the same space but close enough to hear footsteps and the metal sounds changing in some way. Though this memory was unclear, the team recorded it due to its repetition across sessions. After 4 cognitive interview sessions spread over several days, the investigative team compiled the high-stability data points, including 1 environment with no natural light, primarily weak artificial source, 2 cold, damp, hard walls, most likely stone or concrete, 3 steady water dripping, suggesting groundwater or permeable surfaces, 4 characteristic metallic sounds of heavy door or hard object impacts, 5 memory of stairs or downward slope, 6 restricted height and space sensation. These details were classified as sufficiently valuable for analysis because they showed high consistency across sessions and aligned with prior medical data on light and movement restriction. Other memories that were too vague or varied between sessions were temporarily excluded from the priority list. The final outcome of the memory recovery phase was an initial dataset to support hypothetical modeling of the space where Ethan had been held and the surrounding physical conditions, providing a foundation for searching for locations with potentially matching structures within the vast mountainous forest of the Smokies. After synthesizing the high-stability memory details from the cognitive interview sessions, the FBI analysis team proceeded to the next step of matching the sound elements, structural features, and environmental conditions described by Ethan with the geographic and geological data of the Great Smoky Mountains. The first element examined was the steady dripping water sound. Across the vast expanse of the Smokies, this type of sound typically occurs in three kinds of environments: small natural limestone caves formed by long-term erosion, abandoned 19th century mine shafts remaining around areas once mined for copper and iron ore, and damp rock crevices where groundwater seeps through the overlying rock layer and falls onto the floor or walls. Combined with Ethan's description of an enclosed space, lack of light, and cold walls, the analysis team ruled out the possibility of large natural caves, as these typically have better ventilation and more stable temperatures, which do not fully match the stifling airless sensation Ethan described. Instead, the sound pattern most closely matched the characteristics of abandoned mine shafts scattered around the western Smokies region, particularly in the Hazel Creek and Bone Valley areas, where many rough-dug entrances tend to condense water in cycles. Next, the analysis team examined the light characteristics Ethan mentioned: weak yellow light, faintly flickering, and not diffuse enough to illuminate the entire space. Light of this type typically originates from three sources: oil lamps, low-wattage bulbs, powered by small electrical sources, like batteries or mini-generators, or reflected light from a partially obscured lighting device. None of these sources would fit an outdoor natural environment or a place where natural light enters through cracks, indicating that Ethan's environment was almost completely enclosed, with entirely artificial lighting. This reinforced the inference that the space was constructed or modified by humans rather than naturally formed. The analysis continued with a description of the wall and floor structure: rough, cold walls with uneven surfaces, similar to rough stone or concrete. A damp, cold floor with a slight slippery feel when moving. This combination is rarely found in wooden cabins or above-ground structures, where surfaces are typically drier and smoother. In contrast, it frequently appears in abandoned mines, where natural stone walls or rough concrete linings retain high humidity year-round, and damp floors with pooled water are characteristic of underground chamber entrances. When compared to geological data, the experts confirmed approximately 14 recorded locations with man-made tunnels or excavated chambers in the broad area where the group of hikers disappeared. The analysis team then incorporated the temperature factor Ethan described, consistently cold, even when outside weather was warm, to further narrow the search. Only mines deep enough with groundwater flows and low ventilation would maintain year-round cool temperatures. Eliminating natural cave areas, well-ventilated mine chambers, or sites already thoroughly surveyed in prior SIRE operations, the list was reduced to 9 locations capable of producing the full sequence of conditions Ethan described. The analysis team continued by cross-referencing the audio data from the GoPro file before signal loss. In the remaining 11-second audio segment, wind and footstep sounds were abruptly cut off by a short metallic clang. When analyzing frequency and timbre, experts found this sound similar to the impact of an iron door or metal hinge being pulled hard. The short echo suggested a moderately thick metal object and a fairly enclosed surrounding space. This ruled out collision with railings, signposts, or trekking equipment, as those produced distinctly different sounds. When matching this sound type to the structures of abandoned mines, the FBI noted that at least 6 shafts had been reinforced with steel frames or metal doors from the mining era. The old entrances to these shafts were sealed with steel bars or metal plates to prevent public access, and when these objects were impacted, they produced an echo very similar to the type Ethan recalled in his memory. By synthesizing all factors, the dripping water, weak yellow light, Cold, damp stone walls, slippery floor, sensation of descending stairs or a slope, metallic clang. While cross-referencing with geological data and mining history, the analysis team narrowed the suspect area from over 30 potential sites to just 6 most matching locations. These 6 sites were identified based on 3 criteria: 1 having underground structures or mine shafts deep and enclosed enough to produce the light and temperature conditions Ethan described; 2 lying within a feasible travel range, matching the timeline of the 3 hikers' disappearance, based on their route and time from the last signal; and 3 having hydrological features that allow steady dripping water sounds. This was the first time in the entire 6-year investigation that the search area was narrowed based on direct information from a victim, rather than solely on geographic data or scattered physical evidence. The analysis team completed the report, listing these 6 sites by priority level, creating a target list that could be physically checked in the next phase of the terrain sweep of the Smokies. Among the 6 sites narrowed down from memory analysis and geological data, the Bone Valley area was ranked highest priority because it fully met all 3 factors: a history of abandoned mine shafts not resurveyed in over 3 decades, underground stream systems beneath sedimentary rock layers, capable of producing the dripping water sound Ethan described, and dense terrain sufficient to conceal an enclosed structure without easy detection from ground level. To investigate this area, the FBI deployed a specialized drone equipped with high-resolution optical sensors and low-altitude terrain mapping capability to detect anomalies in the canopy. During the survey flight along the northern slope of Bone Valley, the drone recorded an oval-shaped depression in the tree canopy, approximately 3 meters wide, inconsistent with natural treefall patterns or heavy rain-induced subsidence. This deformation suggested a possible void or man-made structure beneath, causing uneven compression of the overlying soil. Upon zooming in on the imagery, a small light reflection point appeared at the edge of the depressed area, suggesting the possibility of a metal object exposed amid moss and leaf litter. The ground team was dispatched to the drone-marked location for direct inspection. At the site of the light reflection, rangers discovered a metal bar approximately 20 centimeters long, protruding slightly above the ground, covered in thick moss. After clearing the moss, it became visible as the upper edge of a larger metal plate, buried or concealed under soil. The metal surface showed localized rust, indicating long-term exposure but not complete oxidation, likely because most of the structure was underground and sealed. To verify the presence of an underground chamber, the technical team used thiolite concentration detectors at cracks and gaps in the ground. When placed near the metal edge, thiolite levels spiked abnormally, far exceeding natural forest background values. This phenomenon typically occurs when a sealed space below has limited air circulation, causing thiolite buildup from organic decomposition or human respiration in confined conditions. Combined with prior drone data, the thiolite readings strengthened the likelihood of a concealed underground chamber or shaft beneath the soil and rock. The technical team continued examining the surrounding soil and discovered numerous boulders stacked in an unnatural pattern, indicating intentional placement to cover a flat surface below. When removing smaller rocks at the structure's edge, part of a rusted metal frame and hinges were revealed. This confirmed the existence of a steel door camouflaged with rocks and leaf litter, likely the entrance to a man-made underground structure. Due to unknown shaft safety, the rescue team was required to follow standard sealed mine entry protocols. The area was secured within a 30-meter radius. With 3 safety layers established: gas detection team, structural stability team, and breach team. A fiber optic borescope camera was inserted through a small gap between the ground and door edge for initial imaging. Preliminary images showed a deep dark interior with no natural light, light gray walls with rough surfaces resembling stone or raw concrete. The first air sample extracted from below showed high CO2, low oxygen, and excessive humidity, confirming this was not a ventilated natural cave, but a sealed space extending downward. Before breaching, the structural team used geological hammers and vibration sensors to assess surrounding soil stability, ensuring no collapse risk when lifting the door. Once stability was deemed sufficient, the breach team used long pry bars and hydraulic lifts to partially open the stuck steel door. As the rusted hinges moved, a rush of cold, damp air escaped, confirming the underground space had existed independently for years, with no air exchange with the outside. The opening process paused at 15 centimeters to allow the sensor team to recheck for toxic gases, avoiding risks of CO, HASAs, or other dangerous compounds. After 3 consecutive readings showed consistent results, high CO Thas, low oxygen, no other toxic gases, the operations team authorized full opening. This was the final step in the preparation phase for accessing the underground structure, marking confirmation of a previously unrecorded concealed shaft, and the first of the 6 suspect sites to show clear signs of a man-made sealed space, potentially directly linked to the disappearance. Once the steel door was fully opened and interior air deemed safe for entry with filtered masks, the forensics team descended into the underground chamber via a steep earthen ramp at about 30 degrees, over 4 meters long, leading to a main chamber approximately 5.2 meters below ground per laser positioning measurements. The shaft layout was preliminarily sketched, a rectangular main chamber roughly 7 meters long, 3.4 meters wide, and only about 1.8 meters high, requiring adults to stoop slightly when standing. Branching from the main chamber were 2 smaller side chambers to the west and east, each about 1.5 meters wide and 2 meters deep, resembling solitary confinement cells. The walls were roughly hewn natural stone, combined with sections reinforced by thin poured concrete panels. The floor was compacted dirt mixed with gravel, uneven and perpetually damp. On the north wall were traces of former support systems using wooden or metal framing, long since removed. When low-power lighting brought in by the forensics team was activated, the scene revealed numerous signs of intentional and prolonged use. The first evidence recorded was dark brown staining on the floor near the northeast corner of the main chamber. A sample tested quickly with phenolphthalein reagent yielded a positive result for human blood. In the western corner, the team found long dark brown hair strands caught in rock crevices. Length and cuticle characteristics matched Chloe's hair description from the 2014 file, though DNA testing was still required for confirmation. Near the area likely used for living items, a small torn piece of gray-green fabric was found, frayed at the edges, with a weave pattern similar to the trekking shirt Mason typically wore. Additional items discovered included a rusted metal can that once held food, a scratched stainless steel spoon, an old non-functional electrical wire, and a low-wattage screw-base bulb, matching the weak yellow light Ethan described in interviews. As the technical team explored the 2 side chambers further, they discovered shackle systems and anchor points, indicating this was not a temporary shelter, but a space used as actual prison cells. On the wall of each side chamber was an iron ring about 10 centimeters in diameter, bolted deeply into the stone with large bolts. Directly below on the floor were corresponding arc-shaped wear marks, indicating chains or metal restraints had been repeatedly pulled in a consistent direction. A 38 centimeters short chain segment remained near the east chamber wall, with a simple hook on one end and heavy rust on the other. Full oxidation analysis indicated the chain had been present and used for many years before being discarded. The locking mechanism was no longer intact, but a U-shaped shackle pin was recovered, proving the system was designed to restrict movement of detained individuals, not only preventing escape from the side chamber, but also limiting range within it. Along the south rock face, the forensics team documented numerous parallel horizontal scratches at 40-60 centimeters height, consistent with wrist position when bound and attempting to pull upward or brace against the wall. The stone surface there showed continuous abrasion, not from water flow but from repeated mechanical friction over extended time. Nearby vertical slide marks indicated moments when the detained person lost balance or collapsed in the confined space. The degree of stone wear suggested activity spanning many years, not weeks or months. The team examining the western main chamber floor noted unusual soil layering, the deepest layer hard and dry, the upper layer damp and loose, indicating the area had been cleaned or disturbed multiple times. Some spots showed tiny metal flecks, likely shavings from tools or shackles scraping the floor. In the east side chamber, close to the wall base, a thin 1.2-meter wooden plank was found with indentations resembling where a detained person repeatedly sat or lay. The wood showed soft rot consistent with prolonged high humidity. Another notable feature was near the north wall, where 3 small pits, 5-7 centimeters deep, were evenly spaced, resembling repeated placement of shoes or heavy objects in the same spots. These depressions indicated fixed placement of sufficiently heavy items over long periods, such as storage containers or living supplies. Combining traces across the side and main chambers, investigators constructed a timeline of shaft usage. Elements like iron rings, wall abrasion, rusted chain, and gravel-mixed soil all indicated long-term use, not recent construction or short-term occupation. Variations in wear depth by layer, along with 2-3 centimeters soil stratification, suggested usage potentially spanning many years. Analysis of soil subsidence, moss coverage on the steel door, and hinge oxidation also indirectly confirmed the shaft had been opened and closed numerous times over an extended period before being abandoned unused for approximately the last 2 years. After completing the initial survey, the forensics team compiled evidence and scene traces, issuing a preliminary assessment. The entire structure, biological evidence, restraint marks, and soil layering all matched the model of a long-operating human detention shaft. The presence of hair, blood, and fabric, likely belonging to the 3 missing hikers, along with restraint systems arranged corresponding to the number of side chambers, strengthened the assumption that this was the detention site for the victims. No traces suggested this was merely an abandoned hiker shelter or temporary homeless dwelling in the forest. The level of reinforcement, restraint mechanisms, and spatial arrangement were consistent only with intentional imprisonment. The forensics team's preliminary conclusion, the underground shaft in Bone Valley, was the location where the 3 victims had been held for an as-yet undetermined, but certainly multi-year period, and the entire scene clearly reflected the presence of human intervention characteristic of an illegal detention site. When the forensic team completed the collection of evidence in the underground bunker, all biological samples obtained from the dirt floor, stone walls, metal chains, and rusted items were transferred to the FBI Knoxville laboratory for multi-layered DNA analysis, including testing for human cells, sweat traces, epidermal cells, and dried blood samples. Among these samples, one DNA sequence that did not match the 3 victims was identified as having sufficient quality for comparison. When entered into the CODIS system, this DNA sequence matched the 2008 profile of an individual named Jonas Beckett, who had been arrested for assault causing injury in a bar fight in Kentucky, but subsequently disappeared from his registered address and was recorded as location unknown since 2010. This match immediately drew the FBI's attention because Beckett had a professional history and background characteristics that aligned with many factors noted in the captivity bunker. According to personnel records, Jonas Beckett had worked as a miner for a mining company in Appalachia, where he had been employed for nearly 8 years before being fired for aggressive behavior and conflicts with management. Beckett's job required skills in tunnel digging, knowledge of geological structures, the ability to reinforce stone walls, and handling confined spaces, all of which were compatible with the structure of the bunker in Bone Valley, which had been manually excavated but reinforced with thin concrete and metal framing. Beyond professional skills, the 2008 legal medical records noted that Beckett had good tolerance for low oxygen environments and high-pressure conditions in mines, allowing him to survive long-term in underground spaces without serious health issues. Investigation of travel records showed that after leaving Kentucky, Beckett had been captured on traffic cameras in Tennessee for several months, primarily in remote areas near the Smoky's border, before completely disappearing from civil tracking systems. There were no rental registrations, employment contracts, medical records, or financial transactions in the following decade. indicating he was capable of living off the grid without leaving traces, a characteristic consistent with someone skilled in deep forest survival. The FBI continued to examine Beckett's history of violence and confirmed he had 2 recorded physical altercations prior to 2008. In both cases, victims described Beckett as prone to sudden attacks, using excessive force beyond what was necessary and displaying unstable behavior when stressed. Preliminary psychological reports from old arrest files indicated Beckett had an isolated personality, limited communication, a tendency to avoid society, and signs of obsession with mining spaces. When these traits were input into the behavioral analysis system, experts concluded that Beckett had the capability to maintain a sealed captivity space for extended periods, knew how to conceal traces, and understood how to exploit the Smoky's terrain to avoid detection. The Bayou constructed Beckett's profile based on 4 main categories of characteristics. First, regarding mobility, Beckett had lived for years in Appalachia. With skills in forest navigation, reading natural signs, and avoiding easily identifiable trails. Second, regarding hideouts, with his mining skills, he could expand tunnels or build additional small chambers for personal use. The Bone Valley bunker was likely just one of several locations he might utilize. Third, regarding operational area. Old data showed Beckett had moved around the Tennessee-North Carolina region along routes consistent with areas featuring underground streams, narrow valleys, and old mining infrastructure. This overlapped with the zones where many prior missing persons cases had occurred. Fourth, regarding captivity behavior based on wall wear patterns, chaining mechanisms, soil layering, and Ethan scar cycles, the Bayou concluded that Beckett was capable of maintaining a repeated captivity pattern, replacing or repairing tools over time, while adjusting the living environment sufficiently to meet the minimal needs of the captives. When overlaying all the data onto a topographic map, the FBI determined Beckett's potential radius of activity could extend from Hazel Creek to Bone Valley, encompassing many unmarked trails. This made pursuing him a major challenge, especially in an area with over 100 miles of dense forest, deep valleys, and numerous no-signal zones. However, based on metal oxidation traces in the bunker and estimates of the last access time, the forensic team concluded that Beckett may have returned to the area within the past 1 to 2 years, indicating he was still active in the region and had not left the Smokies. Based on all the evidence, the FBI drafted an official report proposing the deployment of an organized capture operation, mobilizing local special teams, U.S. Marshals, and NPS mountain tracking units. The plan emphasized that Beckett might be continuously moving between underground structures or other shelters he had prepared over the years, and the operation needed to proceed in a layered encirclement model, combining thermal drones, tracking teams, and mobile checkpoints. This was the first time since the case began that a specific suspect's identity had been established based on direct forensic evidence from the scene, providing a clear foundation to shift the file from analysis to active target pursuit. Immediately after Jonas Beckett's identity was confirmed through DNA analysis, the FBI officially activated a federal manhunt operation in coordination with National Park Service special units, U.S. Marshals, and specialized mountain tracking teams that had previously participated in operations to locate fugitives hiding in the Appalachia region. The deployment plan was based on 2 main assumptions. Beckett was still operating in the broad area between Hazel Creek, Bone Valley, and Forney Ridge, and he had the ability to rotate between multiple hideouts to avoid detection. Therefore, the operation was structured in a multi-layered encirclement model based on terrain analysis combined with behavioral data from the BAU-provided profile. Ground forces were divided into 8 small teams, each consisting of 3 to 5 members with varied skills: footprint and vegetation disturbance tracking, stream flow analysis, silent approach, and operation of handheld thermal scanning devices. In the air, 3 thermal drones flew continuous loops at night, while FLIR helicopters were only deployed upon potential target sightings to avoid noise that could cause Beckett to flee prematurely. Temporary checkpoint systems were established at strategic points along Noland Creek Trail, Forney Creek Trail, and secondary trails to minimize Beckett's chances of leaving the operational area. In the first 3 days, ground forces swept previously listed suspect locations, abandoned mines at Hazel Creek, the northern stone chambers in Bone Valley, the Dry Creek bed area near Deep Creek, and 2 shallow caves where drones had recorded minor canopy distortion. Some sites showed signs of old activity, such as cooled ash, rusted canned goods, indistinct boot prints, and a few fabric fibers caught on low branches, but nothing indicated Beckett's recent presence. However, the tracking team noted 2 significant signs in an area about 1.2 miles from the bunker. First, a section of compressed soil forming a narrow repeated footprint groove, with depth suggesting a lightly loaded person. Second, freshly broken low branches, consistent with someone pushing through dense brush in the past few days. These traces, combined with indistinct boot prints lacking standard tread patterns, characteristic of homemade forest boots or worn-out soles, prompted the command group to shift focus to the low hill range between Hazel Creek and Bone Valley. On the 4th day of the operation, a thermal drone recorded an anomalous heat point under dense canopy about 800 meters from the boot print location. Due to the weak signal, the drone could only confirm it was a small point source heat, possibly an animal or human. However, given Beckett's habit of avoiding exposure, this sign was deemed significant enough to deploy an approach team. 2 NPS teams moved in from 2 directions, one along the eastern slope, the other circling down to the Dry Creek bed to minimize noise. Upon reaching the marked area, they discovered a temporary structure covered with dry branches and moss. Beneath the cover was a small entrance, leading down to a naturally enlarged rock hollow. On the ground at the entrance were fresh burn marks still smelling of wood charcoal, indicating Beckett had been there within the past 24-48 hours. As the approach team tightened the encirclement, a faint sound came from inside the hollow, followed by a shadowy figure briefly visible fleeing through a side exit toward Hazel Creek. Beckett fled across steep terrain, but forces had pre-positioned 2 blocking points at the base of the hill based on predicted escape routes. The pursuit through dense forest lasted nearly 2 hours, with Beckett continually changing direction, using rock crevices and large tree trunks for cover, but signs of fatigue appeared earlier than expected, given prior descriptions of his endurance. The tracking team noted his footprints shifting from even to erratic, indicating injury or exhaustion. By late afternoon, a thermal drone relocated the target when he paused at a large tree near Hazel Creek. Ground teams simultaneously closed in, encircling the area within a 40-meter radius. Realizing there was no escape, Beckett attempted to run toward the water's edge, but was subdued by U.S. Marshals before reaching the stream bank. He was captured wearing a torn jacket, hands covered in mud, face gaunt but alert. On-site search revealed he carried no firearms, only a small folding knife and a cloth bag with basic rudimentary items. The manhunt officially concluded after nearly 5 days of continuous deployment, marking the first time in over a decade that Jonas Beckett had reappeared and been apprehended directly in the area identified as his primary operational zone based on forensic data and behavioral analysis. Immediately after his capture in the Hazel Creek area, Jonas Beckett was transferred to the Federal Detention Center in Knoxville, where the FBI conducted interrogation procedures using the PEACE model to maximize information collection without applying pressure that could cause the suspect to go completely silent. The first session focused on stabilizing Beckett's psychological state, recording basic personal information, and assessing his level of cooperation. Initially, Beckett refused to answer, maintaining a defensive posture, avoiding eye contact, and repeatedly demanding to go back to the forest. But after more than 2 hours of steady dialogue, he began giving intermittent responses. In the second session, investigators shifted to a memory-evoking strategy, asking Beckett to describe his life in the forest over the years without directly mentioning the 3 victims. It was during this phase that Beckett began acknowledging the existence of the Bone Valley bunker and that he had brought people there to keep them. When the investigators specifically asked keep whom, Beckett responded evasively, but eventually confirmed that he had encountered 3 people wandering too close to his place, and decided to take them down to the bunker because he didn't want them to leave. From this initial admission, the investigation team moved to structured questioning, requiring Beckett to outline the sequence of events in 2014. He stated that he had approached the group of hikers as they left the dense forest near Forney Ridge in late afternoon, separating them by pulling them in different directions and taking them down to the bunker at night. Beckett confirmed that Ethan was brought into the bunker first, followed by Chloe and Mason within less than an hour. When asked specifically about the timing of the abductions, Beckett did not remember exact dates but said it was dark and there was mist in the forest, which matched recorded weather descriptions for October 3, 2014. Investigators marked this as indirect timeline confirmation. In subsequent sessions, Beckett's behavior fluctuated noticeably. At times he recounted events with striking detail, at other times he appeared disoriented or deliberately evasive. However, he admitted that Ethan was kept alone in the main chamber during the initial months, while Mason and Chloe were separated into two side chambers because they wouldn't stay still. Beckett described providing food irregularly, mainly canned goods and water from seepage in the bunker. He also admitted to restraining the victims' limbs during many periods, especially when they tried to make noise or break out, which aligned with callous scars and wear marks found on the walls and floor. When asked about the level of violence, Beckett did not deny using force to maintain order, including pushing, dragging and striking with hands or hard objects. He said Ethan weakened over time and stopped causing trouble, while Mason resisted multiple times, leading to injuries on his arms and ribs, details that matched the misaligned healed fractures noted in Ethan's medical examination, indicating the violence pattern Beckett described had a factual basis. Chloe, according to Beckett, stayed put but was hard to calm, often crying or calling for help, causing him to reduce the noise by limiting contact and restraining her for longer periods. This account aligned with the forensic team finding her hair in a rock crevice in the western side chamber, where wall wear indicated prolonged resistance activity. A key part of the interrogation was determining the times of the victims' deaths. When asked directly, Beckett responded fragmentedly that Mason couldn't take it anymore during a winter after being held for over a year, and Chloe became too weak about a year later. Though the statements lacked specifics, the timeline was consistent with soil layering in the bunker and other forensic indicators showing the bunker had not been used in the final 2 years before discovery. However, when investigators asked Beckett to specify where he had taken Mason's and Chloe's bodies, Beckett fell silent, looked down at the table, and refused to answer. In the next 3 sessions, he either said he didn't remember or responded with meaningless statements about the forest and water. The investigation team concluded that Beckett was deliberately withholding information or reinforcing a psychological defense mechanism to avoid confronting questions about the 2 victims' deaths. This made the statements regarding body locations unusable directly. Nevertheless, most other information Beckett admitted, including the approach to the hikers, the method of taking each one to the bunker, the way he held them captive, and his treatment of them over the years, matched the scene evidence and forensic data, allowing confirmation that Beckett was the person directly responsible for holding the 3 victims captive. The lack of information about Mason's and Chloe's body locations became the only unclear point in the confession, but it did not diminish the legal value of the remaining parts, which aligned with the entire system of physical and biological evidence collected from the Bone Valley bunker. Immediately after Beckett admitted to holding the 3 victims captive, but refused to reveal the locations of Mason's and Chloe's bodies, the FBI launched an expanded search operation around the Bone Valley bunker, based on soil layering data, probable perpetrator movement directions, and surface disturbance analysis. The forensic geology team conducted test drilling at 42 points within a 300-meter radius of the bunker entrance, focusing on areas with abnormal soil compaction indices or moisture levels inconsistent with natural geology. GPR equipment recorded 2 anomalous response zones on the northeast slope, but direct inspection revealed only small natural caves containing no related objects. After 2 weeks with no results, the search team shifted to analyzing Beckett's movement patterns based on the timelines he provided and terrain routes, allowing nighttime movement without detection. This data indicated a high likelihood that Beckett had removed the bodies from the bunker via dry stream beds or mountain crevices where seasonal rainwater could erase traces. Accordingly, the search team moved along steep rock crevices connecting Bone Valley to Hazel Creek, including 8 narrow gullies wide enough to drag heavy objects. On the 11th day of the operation, an NPS team member discovered in a 3-meter-deep mountain crevice a long bone mixed with leaf litter and rock debris. When collected and brought to the surface, forensics confirmed it was an adult human femur. The area was immediately sealed and excavation expanded. Within the next 48 hours, the forensic team recovered multiple other bone fragments, pelvis, ribs, 2 vertebrae, part of the skull, and 3 hand bone pieces. The state of decomposition, bone color, and insect traces indicated the skeleton had been there for at least 4 years, and at most 6 years, matching the time frame Beckett described for one of the 2 victims' deaths. Upon close examination of bone surfaces, experts noted several antemortem injuries: a longitudinal crack on the 5th rib, an old offset fracture in the humerus, and wear around the shoulder socket. These were all signs of prolonged restraint or repeated pulling force, consistent with the conditions described in Ethan's examination. DNA analysis from bone marrow yielded a match with Mason Doyle based on 2014 archive records. Confirming the second victim's identity was seen as a critical piece completing the death timeline. Continuing to follow Beckett's probable movement patterns, the search team expanded the area an additional 600 meters north along the sloping terrain toward Hazel Creek. 3 days later, a thermal drone detected unusual animal clustering at a fallen tree, where there were signs of recently eroded, disturbed soil. When the ground team approached and began probing with specialized soil rods, they detected a softer-than-normal soil layer. Within minutes of digging, a skull fragment with remaining long hair was exposed. The forensic team immediately conducted full excavation of the area, recovering nearly the entire second skeleton, including the skull, spine, arm bones, leg bones, and foot bones. Although decomposition was more advanced than Mason's, many traces remained clear. Cervical bones showed arc-shaped sliding marks consistent with neck restraint or hard object binding. Left ribs had 2 perimortem fractures, and the right wrist bones showed characteristic wear similar to iron shackle marks in the western side chamber. These signs aligned with Beckett's account of reducing noise from the victim by prolonged limb restraint. Carbon isotope dating and mineralization ratios indicated death between the 2nd and 3rd year after abduction. DNA extracted from the tibia and teeth matched archived samples, confirming Chloe Ramirez. With both bodies confirmed, the forensic team completed the death timeline for the 3 victims based on biological data and statements from Ethan and Beckett. All 3 were abducted on the same night in 2014. Mason died after about 1 year due to exhaustion combined with untreated injuries. Chloe died 1 to 2 years later, most likely from malnutrition, lack of movement, and injuries from continuous restraint. Ethan, who had better physical condition and greater endurance, remained captive for an additional 4 years before Beckett abandoned the bunker and left, leading to his discovery alive in 2020. With the full identification of the 2 bodies along with analysis of causes and timing of death, the forensic file closed the most critical missing information in the case, providing a solid legal foundation for the entire prosecution process against the perpetrator. After the bodies of Mason and Chloe were discovered and a complete forensic examination established the timeline of their deaths, the United States Department of Justice formally indicted Jonas Beckett in the federal court for the Eastern District of Tennessee on a total of 9 serious charges: federal kidnapping resulting in death for 2 victims, prolonged unlawful kidnapping and confinement for 3 victims, first-degree murder of Mason Doyle and Chloe Ramirez, intentional infliction of serious bodily injury, deprivation of civil rights, use of federal facilities to commit criminal acts, and neglect of victims leading to serious harm. Since the crime scene was located within the boundaries of Great Smoky Mountains National Park, federal territory, the entire case fell under the jurisdiction of the federal court and was overseen by the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office. The trial began with preliminary hearings, where the judge confirmed that Beckett was competent to stand trial, even though his psychiatric record showed abnormal behavior, but did not meet the threshold for incompetence. The federal prosecutor presented a detailed indictment, describing how Beckett had confined 3 victims in a manually modified underground bunker, isolating them, restraining them, and maintaining subminimal living conditions for years, resulting in the deaths of 2 and lifelong trauma for the survivor. Beckett's defense attorney moved to suppress certain evidence related to statements made during interrogations, citing mental instability, but the court denied the motion because all interrogation sessions were fully audio and video recorded, conducted in the presence of a psychologist, and followed the non-coercive peace procedure. When the main trial commenced, the federal prosecution presented a series of physical and forensic evidence, Beckett's DNA samples collected from chains, walls, and the bunker floor, wear patterns on iron rings and stone walls consistent with adult wrist height, dried blood samples matching Mason's profile, hair and fabric recovered matching Chloe's bone injuries and scars on Ethan, consistent with prolonged restraint and beatings, and notably, the bunker layout showing a structure designed for confinement, not a natural shelter. Another critical piece of evidence was the analysis of light and climate conditions in the bunker, including abnormally high CO2 levels and mold layers that only form in enclosed spaces, matching Ethan's descriptions from cognitive interview sessions and reinforcing that he had indeed been in such an environment for years. The prosecution also presented the complete death timeline, constructed from the examination of the 2 skeletons. Mason died after about 1 year due to trauma and exhaustion. Chloe died 1 to 2 years later due to malnutrition, restricted movement, and mechanical injuries, while Ethan continued to be held until 2020, when Beckett abandoned the bunker. Ethan's testimony was considered the centerpiece of the trial. Although he was still undergoing psychological and physical therapy, the court allowed him to testify in a specially controlled environment with limited time. Ethan recounted in a low, halting voice the years of captivity, dim light, cold dirt floor, echoing metal sounds, dripping water, and the sensation of confined space. He described Beckett as a man of few words who appeared suddenly and disappeared for days, sometimes bringing food down and sometimes not. He said the victims were kept separated, restrained by hands or feet at various stages, and that Mason gradually weakened before collapsing, while Chloe stopped talking in her final months. Although Ethan's memory was incomplete, the fragments aligned with physical traces in the bunker and served as direct evidence of Beckett's confinement and cruel treatment. The defense attorney attempted to argue that Beckett suffered from mental disorders, that he lived in a state detached from reality, and lacked the capacity to understand the severity of his actions, but court-appointed psychiatric experts concluded that although Beckett exhibited obsessive, isolated, and mildly paranoid traits, he was fully competent to stand trial and fully aware of the consequences of his actions. Another important factor was the forensic analysis of the bunker's usage over the years, wear on the iron rings, soil layering, charcoal traces, metal oxidation, and microbial distribution all proved that the bunker had been continuously used for 3 to 4 years before being abandoned, perfectly matching Ethan's indirect testimony and forensic findings. After 13 days of trial and 3 hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously found Beckett guilty on all 9 counts. The jury foreperson stated that the forensic evidence far exceeded the threshold of reasonable doubt, and Ethan's testimony was an irrefutable cornerstone of authenticity. The jury's verdict paved the way for the sentencing phase, where the maximum penalty, life imprisonment without parole for each kidnapping, resulting in death count, totaling 3 consecutive life sentences, ensured no possibility of reduction, no chance of parole, and no review of the sentence in any form. The courtroom fell silent as the judge emphasized that the prolonged, deliberate brutality of Beckett's actions placed the case among the most serious ever seen in the Smokies region in decades. Immediately after sentencing, Beckett was transferred under special federal procedures for high-risk inmates, mandatory medical examination, psychiatric classification, and security risk assessment. Due to the nature of the case involving long-term confinement and the defendant's sophisticated hiding ability, the Federal Bureau of Prisons decided to house Beckett at USP Florence AD Max, the Supermax prison where inmates are monitored 23 hours a day in solitary cells. The transfer was carried out using specialized federal transport vehicles escorted by U.S. Marshals with multi-layered security to ensure no incidents during the cross-state movement. While the law closed Beckett's fate, the long-term consequences for Ethan and the families of the other two victims could not be resolved quickly. Ethan continued treatment in a recovery program for long-term confinement victims, including nutritional therapy, physical therapy to restore movement, and long-term psychological intervention to address complex PTSD. Doctors assessed that it could take many years for him to regain even partial health and social integration, as 6 years of restricted light and movement had left deep marks on his bone structure, muscles, and nervous system. Mentally, Ethan struggled with sleep, avoided bright light, and reacted strongly to metal sounds, lingering traces from his time in the underground bunker. The families of Mason and Chloe, after years of waiting without answers, finally received the remains for proper funerals. Although Beckett's sentence was seen as maximum justice, their loss could not be compensated. Both families spoke during post-trial hearings, expressing gratitude to the search and investigation teams, but emphasizing that the years their children were held and suffered could not be fully captured by any legal sentence. The case shocked the entire national park management system and forced Great Smoky Mountains National Park to change many search and rescue procedures. A new task force was established to monitor abandoned mine sites, underground structures, and areas vulnerable to concealment. Thermal drone technology was added to regular patrol procedures, and missing persons reporting was standardized into 2 levels: ordinary missing and suspected criminal element missing. Forest areas previously considered low risk due to lack of tourist activity were now included in seasonal monitoring lists for periodic checks. At the same time, the FBI reopened a series of long-standing missing persons cases in the Smokies area over the past 25 years, including all 23 cases previously cross-referenced during the Beckett investigation. An analysis team was assigned to determine how many might be linked to Beckett's pattern of activity and how many might involve other individuals hiding deep in the forest. Reopening these unsolved files once again raised questions about the vastness of mountainous regions rarely visited by humans and the potential existence of undocumented underground structures on official maps. One final discovery during the Bone Valley area inspection extended the case's aftermath. When the forensic team returned to the main bunker to complete sealing and remove temporary monitoring equipment, they discovered a narrow crevice at the back of the eastern side chamber, concealed by naturally fallen rock. When inserting an endoscopic camera, they saw the beginning of a small tunnel leading deeper downward, showing signs of manual expansion but incomplete. Due to unknown depth and collapse risk, the team could not excavate immediately. This discovery was recorded in the final report as an unexamined auxiliary bunker and transferred to the NPS Long-Term Geological Survey Program. No one could confirm whether the structure was related to Beckett's activities or merely remnants of an old mine, but its existence right next to the main confinement bunker suggested the possibility of additional unknown underground spaces in the area. The case closed in the eyes of the law, but the lingering questions about the forest, hidden underground structures, and unsolved disappearances meant that the Smokies, though partially illuminated, retained its characteristic heavy silence, where nature and secrets continue to exist side by side, waiting for the next person to step in. The story of 3 hikers who went missing in Great Smoky Mountains and spent 6 years confined in an underground bunker is not just a personal tragedy, but also reflects many societal issues that Americans face today: overconfidence in outdoor activities, absolute trust in the safety of national parks, gaps in missing persons reporting systems, and especially the risk from socially isolated individuals like Jonas Beckett. In this case, Ethan, Mason, and Chloe were all young people with basic trekking experience, staying on the correct trail, registering at the visitor center, and yet falling into the hands of someone hiding in the mountains for years. This reminds us that even places considered safe, like Great Smoky Mountains, which welcomes millions of visitors each year, still harbor risks from unpredictable human elements. The fact that Beckett lived anonymously for over 10 years, leaving no financial, medical, or civil traces, shows that the U.S. welfare and mental health evaluation systems still miss many individuals who slip through the social safety net, leading to unforeseeable consequences. The important lesson is that safety never relies solely on experience or equipment. In the story, the 3 victims' phone signals disappeared simultaneously, an unusual sign that today, with positioning and location sharing technology, we could detect early by using group tracking apps or independent SOS beacon devices. Additionally, Ethan's survival due to being found by chance highlights the need for a culture of regular check-ins whenever entering wilderness areas, something many Americans often overlook. Finally, the story also reminds us to pay more attention to isolated people in our communities. Beckett was once a miner with skills, but he later vanished from society, and no one noticed. This disconnection created conditions for deviant behavior to develop silently. When we understand the roots of criminal behavior, we see even more clearly the importance of community connection, psychological support, and proactive reporting of unusual signs. The Smokies, with its pristine beauty, remains a wonderful destination, but this story reminds us that the freedom to explore must come with responsibility for self-protection and vigilance, not letting the tranquility of nature deceive us about hidden dangers. Thank you for joining us in exploring this haunting case in the Smokies region. If you found the story helpful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue following in-depth analyses of other mysterious disappearances. See you in the next video, where we will continue our journey into the hidden corners that the real world still conceals.